On the morning of July 16th, 1906, a group of Japanese seal hunters came ashore on St. Paul Island in the remote Pribilof Islands of Alaska. Armed with clubs, knives, and guns, the hunters proceeded to poach northern fur seals from the beaches. Unbeknownst to them, the US Navy maintained a biological research station on these same islands, hundreds of miles from mainland Alaska. Determined to stop the illegal poaching, a group of sailors confronted the hunters, setting off a brawl that left 5 Japanese citizens dead, 2 wounded, and 12 more captured. And it incited an international incident that nearly led to war. Hello. Before we get started, I just want to take a moment to thank today's sponsor, BetterHelp. I am a huge proponent of therapy for anyone and everyone, no matter if you have a clinical mental health issue or you just need someone to talk to. Life is hard. There was a time in my life that was dominated by anxiety and depression, and I lived in constant fear of panic attacks. I was just kind of lost. I didn't really know where my place was in this world. Therapy helped me work through that, and I am a better person today because of it. I firmly believe that. I probably never would have started this very YouTube channel if I had never gone to therapy. So I want as many people as possible to know about therapy and to experience it for themselves so that you can get the same benefits that I did. And that's where BetterHelp comes in to play. They are making therapy more affordable and more accessible. All you have to do is go to their website using the link in my description at betterhelp.com/nationalparkdiaries, fill out a few questions, and BetterHelp will match you, usually within about 48 hours, with a therapist that best meets your needs. It's tailored to you. It is incredibly easy, and you can do it all from your phone or computer, whether that's a phone call, a video chat, or even just messaging back and forth, whatever you feel the most comfortable with. Again, this is all about accessibility. So if you're looking to start taking advantage of the wonderful benefits that therapy provides, click the link in my description at betterhelp.com/nationalparkdiaries to get 10% off your first month of BetterHelp. Thank you, BetterHelp, for sponsoring this video. And now back to the seals. So, 37 years before this so-called Alaska seal incident in 1869, the Pribilof Islands had already been set aside as a quote-unquote special reservation for government purposes by President Ulysses S. Grant. The roots of this reserve and the subsequent conflicts that centered on it can all be traced back to those seals we talked about in the intro, northern fur seals, Calorhinus ursinus. The Pribilof Islands host not only the largest rookeries of northern fur seals in the world, but the largest colonies of any marine mammal in the northern hemisphere. When Russian hunters arrived to these islands in 1786, 4 million fur seals called them home. Never again have their numbers risen so high. The great powers of the Pacific Basin at this time, the United States, the United Kingdom, Russia, and Japan, were all in competition for fur seals and the tremendous economic benefits which followed their slaughter. It was this competition that prompted President Grant to protect the seals and create the Pribilof Islands Reserve in the first place. To be clear, this was a first-of-its-kind conservation policy. It predated Yellowstone National Park by 3 years, also under President Grant. It predated National Forest by 12 years, National Wildlife Refuges by 37, and the National Park Service by 47. The Pribilof Island Seal Reserve was, quite possibly, the first marine protected area in the world. At a time when setting aside anything for the protection of anything was downright unheard of, the creation of this reserve was a watershed moment in conservation history. Today, the islands are protected as part of the Alaska Maritime National Wildlife Refuge, which protects over 2,400 islands, 4.9 million acres, and 40 million birds, not to mention the marine mammals and other wildlife of this area. But make no mistake, This initial conservation measure here in the Pribilofs had economics at its heart. The impetus for protection of the fur seals was to shut out competition from other countries and monopolize the economic benefits of fur seal harvesting for the US government, to ensure that the harvest was sustainable and that we could continue to profit off of it for years to come. This was utilitarian conservation before utilitarian conservation became mainstream. So that is the conservation backdrop for the Alaska seal incident of 1906. That's our protected places angle for this story. But there is another important historical through line that helps to contextualize this story as well: anti-Japanese sentiment. It was running high in the United States at this time, especially on the West Coast, as people sought scapegoats for the destruction caused by the San Francisco earthquake of 1906. Between May and November of that year following the earthquake, 290 incidents of assault occurred in San Francisco. Most of them were perpetrated against Japanese citizens. 2 renowned Japanese seismologists were even stoned while inspecting the San Andreas Fault because people did not like their assertion that you should not build things on fault lines. The Japanese government had already donated $246,000 for earthquake relief efforts and quickly became unhappy at the treatment its citizens were receiving. The Alaska seal incident then kind of lit the fuse of these simmering tensions between the United States and Japan. Immediately, both sides rushed to the defense of their respective actors in the incident. Japan said the response of the US sailors was disproportionate to the crime committed, that seal poaching was a misdemeanor offense, and that responding with murder was completely out of bounds. They called for punitive measures and court-martials for the sailors. The United States responded with a report detailing the brutalities of the Japanese poaching effort, including pictures of half-skinned but still alive seals hobbling along the beach and the clubbing of baby seals. It was also quick to point out that despite the remote location, this was in fact still US territory. Teddy Roosevelt, president at the time, was kind of apoplectic about the whole thing. He loathed poaching and steadfastly defended the sailors for protection of American wildlife and American territory. But he did fear an international incident, and he feared escalation of the conflict. Despite his zeal for the defense of the seals, he still preferred a diplomatic solution rather than a military one. He ordered the withdrawal of the US Navy ships from all Asian waters. But then, the US State Department drafts this memo in defense of the sailors and sort of outlines Roosevelt's whole position on this issue. I'll put the whole quote up on the screen here, but the gist of their defense was basically, look, these islands are too remote and too wild for any sort of normal legal recourse here. The sailors were basically playing by Wild West rules, and thus their actions were totally justified. They even included a quote from Rudyard Kipling in this memo, who had actually written about the seals of the Pribilof Islands in The Jungle Book. And now it was the Japanese government's turn to be apoplectic. They're like, I cannot believe you just use Rudyard Kipling and cowboy diplomacy as a legal defense in an international dispute concerning the murder of Japanese citizens. So things are kind of popping off at this point, which is when the Secretary of State, Elihu Root, steps in. He drafts a new defense of the sailors this time, one that at least had some legal underpinnings. He says, look, the Japanese sailors weren't poaching, they were burgling. And burglary in Alaska is a felony, therefore the response from our sailors was justified. Japan is like, fine. They don't like it, but they can at least accept it as a reason for not going to war over some seals, since it had actually like the thinnest legal reasoning and not just Rudyard Kipling and cowboys. So at this point, the whole incident kind of fizzles out, at least as it pertains to war. because the seal question was still not answered. The northern fur seals of the Pribilof Islands were still an immense economic asset, and the question of their conservation was still unsettled. Until 1911, when the United States, the United Kingdom, Russia, and Japan agreed to the North Pacific Fur Seal Convention, which bans pelagic or open ocean hunting of fur seals and recognizes the US jurisdiction for fur seal management in the Pribilofs, but allows for certain payments and minimum take allowances there for other countries. It included provisions for subsistence hunting by native Aleuts and was the first ever international wildlife conservation treaty, which set the groundwork not only for more fur seal preservation efforts in the future, but for more international wildlife treaties all over the world. Two of those fur seal protection measures were the Fur Seal Act of 1966, passed by the US Congress and banning the hunting of fur seals on the Pribilof Islands, again with the exception of native Aleut subsistence, and the Marine Mammal Protection Act, which fur seals were listed under. Today, despite these protections, fur seal populations continue to decline due to low pup survival rates. The ultimate cause of this decline is still up for debate, but signs do point to the lesser availability of calorie-dense, nutritious types of fish in areas where fur seals typically hunt. Essentially, the ocean is not nutritious enough right now to sustain large fur seal populations, and young fur seals are having a harder time sort of bulking up for them to be able to leave the islands and survive in the open ocean. Whether this is due to human factors, natural factors, or a combination of both is what we still don't know. But regardless, these islands and these seals have a long and contentious conservation history. And it's a history that, to me, seems somewhat forgotten about. From the first marine protected area in the world to the first international wildlife conservation treaty, the Pribilof Islands have sneakily racked up some key conservation milestones and have laid the groundwork for future conservation policies and approaches. Conservation is often about building on successes, but to build, you first need a foundation. The remote, rocky, windswept beaches of the Pribilof Islands are, for modern marine conservation, that foundation.